Hello and welcome to this first video. This is going to take you through the extract question, the section A, Shakespeare question from component 1. This is an Eduqas specific video, so if you're with a different exam board, this might be, I'm afraid, of some limited use. Now, it's worth remembering that the Shakespeare section, section A in component 1, English Literature, is split into the extract and the essay task. This video is going to be focused entirely on the extract to begin with, and there's going to be another follow-up video after this that focuses on the essay, because there are slightly different approaches required and of course quite different timings as well. Now what we're looking at here is the mark scheme, and we're focusing our attention on the top band because we want to be aiming for grade 7 to 9, we want to be aiming for a high grade in this. And there's just a few things worth bearing in mind that obviously we need to kind of carry on into the actual analysis of the extract. We won't know what the extract is. I've just chosen one pretty much at random, and a really good revision tip would be to look at random extracts from the play and test yourself. Can I analyse this? Can I say some interesting things about the language? Can I say some interesting things about the characters, this moment in the play? Can I even work out which moment in the play it's taken from? So, if we have a look at this top band, so for 13, 14 or 15 marks out of the 15, what do we need to do? Well, it says a number of interesting things that are worth bearing in mind in our responses. First off, it mentions the overview. Okay? Now, in my class, I'll regularly talk about situating the extract. Why have they given you this extract over and above any other in the play? Why is this moment important? Is it a moment of important character development? Is it pivotal in terms of the plot? Why this extract and not some other? It also mentions things like a sensitive and evaluative approach. Now, this kind of language, which is not a particularly natural fit for most students, ultimately means, are you responding sensitively? Are you responding thoughtfully? Are you weighing up the impact of Shakespeare's specific language and structural choices and the impact they have obviously on an audience, whether that's a contemporary audience or an audience in 2020? The other thing that many students neglect in the mark scheme, specifically under AO1, is this idea of originality and having a personal response. You may do that, you may implicitly produce a personal response, but it's worth bearing in mind that you need to make it very clear to the examiner that you are delivering a personal response. And that might be something as straightforward as opening your sentence with something like personally, comma, just to highlight that to the examiner. If we have a look at AO2, something that we really need to be paying attention to, okay? This is all about exploration of language, form and structure. And there are lots of different ways of doing this, and we'll be looking at some structural features in this extract in a moment. We'll be looking obviously at the language, form, so you could be commenting on things like the use of metre, for example. The poetic metre of the witches that we're going to be looking at in the extract is rather interesting in itself. It says precise subject terminology, okay? So not just scattergun, not just crowbarring it in. I often use the analogy with bird watching. You're not just trying to spot a metaphor. You're not just trying to find one of those similes and just simply comment on the fact that yes, that is a simile. That of itself is almost entirely meaningless and won't be credited. So why is Shakespeare making these specific choices? And of course, fundamentally, what impact are they having on meaning? So these are the things that we want to pay attention to. This is what the mark scheme is saying we need to deliver. Bearing in mind we need to deliver all of this in approximately 20 minutes. So if we swap this out and have a quick look at the extract, very famous one. Okay, you should be very familiar to anyone who has read and seen the play. Taken from the very beginning, okay? And so we've got the witches on stage here. The question is given at the bottom. Look at how the witches speak and behave here. What does it reveal to an audience about them at this point in the play? So we want to go through, in effect, the same intellectual pattern or process every time we get given the extract. So first off, I'm sat here, I'm in the exam and I'm thinking, okay, what have we got? Well, what do I need to do? I need to situate the extract. So I'm going to quickly make a note here. I'm going to situate the extract. Okay, and it's the start of the play. Okay, so this is the first we see of any characters in the play. Okay, and we've got the witches on stage. So when shall we three meet again? In thunder, lightning, or in rain? Now, what we notice, you'll have to excuse the soft sound of my cat meowing in the background. It's slightly creepy, given the witches. We've got to notice immediately, okay, the use of rhyming couplets. But again, we're not just bird watching. We're not just saying, "Oh, look, here's a rhyming couplet." What are we doing with that? Well, we've got this kind of incantation effect or spell-like effect. Okay, we've got an interesting kind of language going on here. When shall we three meet again? In thunder, lightning, or in rain? The rhyming couplets is distinctive. It produces that spell-like effect that's so distinctive to the witches. We've got that continued when the hurly-burly's done, when the battle's lost and won. And a little bit of context here, bearing in mind that AO3 context is not assessed in this, but it is worth bearing in mind that it was believed at the time that witches could affect the weather. Witches could affect the weather. Well, okay, so what? So we've got supernatural power. Also remembering that witches were not seen as a sort of Halloween amusement, but were a genuine, live and very real threat. So it seems that the witches have this supernatural foresight. When the hurly-burly's done, when the battle's lost and won. We've also got our first taste, really. Okay, battles lost and won. Well, we've got our first taste of paradoxical language and the very beating heart of the play itself, the notion of equivocation. Okay, the play is all about equivocation. The word equivocation, I imagine, would come up in virtually every single response, extract, or essay. Okay, that would be before the set of sun. So again, have we got supernatural foresight? Can the witches foresee what's going to happen? And that's obviously very important, isn't it, in terms of the witches' prophecies? Okay, where are the witches here? Okay, where are they going to meet Macbeth? Again, that they seem to be able to recognise when this is going to happen and where they're going to meet him. Well, they're going to meet him upon the heath. They're going to meet him outside of towns or villages. Okay, they kind of, and this sense of the witches as the ultimate outsiders in Shakespeare is really, really important. Okay, we'll talk a little bit about that and some of Terry Eagleton's writing about the witches that also links in with this question of the witches' outsider odd status. So they're going to be meeting him outside of where humans normally live or are to be found. So they're going to meet with our friend Macbeth. This is our first mention. Okay. They're called away, it seems, by their familiars. Okay, by these spirits, evil spirits of some description, okay, and here taking the form of animals. And then, okay, we've got the very famous lines, fair is foul and foul is fair, hover through the fog and filthy air. So much to say about this, okay? Again, rhyming. So this very much has all the hallmarks. It sounds very much like a spell. The rhyming produces that, but also the Trochaic Tetrameter, okay? Now, we don't want to labour the points. The crucial thing to remember, I would say, particularly at GCSE, is that when we're talking about Trochaic Tetrameter, Shakespeare's using a different form of poetic meter for the witches than other human characters. And Shakespeare typically uses Trochaic Tetrameter for supernatural characters. So he is highlighting in the actual sound and rhythms of their speech their supernatural nature. But if we actually look at some of the language choices here, we've got yet more sense of the kind of slipperiness of language. This sense of language being difficult to hold on to, certainly the language of the witches. We've got this strange, again, paradoxical kind of ambiguity. That's going on here. That's very important. We are reminded that they hover through the fog and filthy air. Again, are they of the earth? Something that Banquo asks directly when they actually end up meeting the witches. And this paradoxical, ambiguous language, this equivocating language, is so important for the witches. Why is it important? Well, here, what's going on with the witches? There's a sense of the witches' identities not really being particularly individual, that they are kind of part of a sort of greater whole. Note here that they speak in unison. So we've got a sense in which we could say that identity is dissolved. The witches are many and individual at the same time. They also are able to engage in the kind of equivocating, ambiguous language that ultimately is Macbeth's downfall. He recognises at the end of the play, they palter with us in a double sense, that what the witches say cannot be trusted, cannot be relied upon. It seems that what appears fair is in fact foul, and that's an important lesson certainly for King Duncan, who seemingly fails to heed that lesson twice when it comes to the Thane of Cawdor, that what appearances can be deceptive to us. Lots and lots of quotations throughout the play, look like the innocent flower, but be the serpent under it. Lots and lots of references in the play to appearances being deceptive, the inability to read one's the facial expressions of others as a way of understanding what's going on in terms of their thought processes. It's something that King Duncan himself specifically mentions. Lady Macbeth admonishes and chastises her husband for being effectively Macbeth being too easy to read, like being easy to read like a book. So this question of appearance versus reality is obviously a very live, important issue within the play, and we've got many of the key themes, many of the key ideas in the play being set up here. It's worth also noting that this fair is foul, foul is fair becomes Macbeth's first line. So foul and fair a day I have not seen. So it seems that Macbeth, whether he knows it or not, appears that he doesn't, is echoing the language of the witches. Is that further indication to the audience that the witches have this supernatural power, this ability to manipulate Macbeth? Or rather, is it an indication of Macbeth's own diabolical, malevolent nature, that once his hamartia, his tragic flaw of ambition, is sort of preyed upon by the witches, that his sort of true personality comes to the fore, is ultimately revealed. And that brings us neatly on to the question of Terry Eagleton, who's quite a famous literary critic, who writes about the witches, and he in fact writes about the witches in a very positive way. You may well be used to the witches being presented as evil, malevolent, devilish characters, but Eagleton sees the witches as rather strangely and perhaps counterintuitively as the most honest characters in the play. that it's their very slipperiness and ambiguity, the fact that they seem to be, as Banquo says, neither woman nor man. They're effectively bearded ladies. They seem to be, inhabitants on the earth, and yet appear to be floating. Quite what are they? They can dissolve into nothingness. Are they human? Are they spirits? What are they? That actually their very slipperiness reveals Macbeth's dark heart, but even worse than that, Macbeth's kind of emptiness. He's something of a void and seeks to pour in positions of power and dominance, and ultimately, without that, providing any kind of seeming reward for Macbeth whatsoever. So the witches here, really, really crucial characters. Obviously a very powerful opening to the play, attention-grabbing opening. Shakespeare wants to entertain an audience, and he's giving us what's potentially a very unsettling, unnerving, and certainly to an audience at the time, frightening opening to the play. So we've got lots to write, lots to think about. We've situated the extract that this is the first scene that we experience as an audience, that we've got our first mention of Macbeth, but we're hearing about him. We've not yet actually met him. We've got Macbeth's language later we learn is being kind of echoed here by the witches, so we've got that immediate connection between these characters and the titular character of the play. So, lots to say. We've situated the extract, we've worked our way through methodically, we've looked at some questions of poetic meter, we've looked at some of the key themes, and really what we want to be doing in any kind of written response now is taking some of this micro details, some of these individual word choices, some of these words like fair and foul, like heath, and exploring the impact of these particular choices, and then how those choices relate to the big ideas of the play. And of course we go back to equivocation, ambiguity, appearance versus reality. So we've got our annotated extract. The next stage, which we'll do shortly, will be to actually write this up. Now, if you have a look at the timings, it's 20 minutes. So we do not have huge amounts of time in which to produce a written response. We want to make sure that our quotations are as short as possible in order to be efficient, and we do want to get a range. The mark scheme talks about sustaining focus on the task. We also need to make sure we've got a coherent response that covers as much of the extract as possible. So we don't want to, when given the extract, just look at the first couple of lines. We need to make sure we've got a good, even coverage of the extract. Quotations from the beginning, middle, and end. So in the next video, what we'll do is actually write this up and turn this into a written response. Do so under timed conditions, and I'll narrate the process of constructing that response.